What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So if you have been watching some of my other videos or tracking the channel over the last little bit, you may know that I am a huge Georgia fan, have been my entire life, and so last night's national championship game was absolutely insane for me. Honestly, I'm still processing it all. I just knew I had to make a video summarizing what I felt were the key points of the game and just talking about the game, my biggest long-term takeaways after the big Georgia win. Obviously, I am absolutely ecstatic. I'm thrilled with the game and how it went out. Very stressful, very tight game, very competitive. Just a quick reminder, going into this game, I had Georgia winning 34-31, and so I was very close on the Georgia score, but not as close on the Alabama score, which I think is largely just due to the sheer amount of field goals that Alabama kicked in this game. And after that first half, I felt like I was way off, but it ended up being a little bit closer to the score that I predicted than I thought it would be at halftime. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into my major takeaways from the game. And to me, the biggest key takeaway and point in this game was just that the Georgia defense. I mean, they played outstanding all night. In my opinion, they proved to everybody that they're a generational defense. They're a historically good defense. You can argue about if they're the greatest defense of all time or not. I'm not going to make that argument on here, but they are absolutely a generational defense, and in my opinion, the greatest Georgia defense of all time at the very least. I mean, they forced 2 interceptions from Bryce Young, who had just 5 interceptions in the previous 14 games, and that's counting the one he threw against Cincinnati. If you don't count that, then he had just 4 interceptions in all of the regular season. And then you get a massive pick six there that seals the game. I mean, it's a huge interception turning point for the game. I feel like that's when everybody knew that Georgia had finally won it and finally gotten over that hurdle. It was a huge moment. Everybody lost their minds, and as far as Georgia fans goes, at least. And that was a huge moment there, and that goes to the defense. I mean, they got pressure on Bryce Young all night. Really, really got, especially in the second half, really got after him. The loss of Jameson Williams, I feel like, really allowed them to trust themselves a little bit more in more man coverage looks or in more heavy blitz packages. Just really turn themselves loose in the pass rush. And they did that while Jameson Williams was still in the game. I think that was most of the game plan to begin with. But when Jameson Williams went down, any amount of fear or any trepidation about blitzing heavy and just trusting your secondary to match up well, I think that kind of went out the window once Jameson Williams went down. Georgia felt very confident at that point, and I think they called the game slightly differently knowing that, because Alabama certainly had to call the game differently, and the defense adjusts accordingly. The amount of times that Georgia's offense gave Alabama incredibly short fields, and the defense stood strong anyway, held them to 3 points, or even forced a punt. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. It was massive in this game. If Georgia's defense doesn't bow up in the red zone as much as they do, this game is completely different. I mean, they absolutely shut down Alabama's ability to convert drives into touchdowns. And if they don't do that, like I said, the score is completely different. The momentum of this game is completely different. Everything about this game completely shifts at that point. Alabama's held to just 30 rushing yards on 28 attempts for 1.1 yards per carry, a lot of which is due to the sacks that Bryce Young took. That kind of kills their rushing numbers, because in college, quarterback sacks go against your rushing numbers, which I don't like. But, I mean, to be honest, they couldn't really run the ball all night with the exception of one good drive in the second half with Brian Robinson. He got very hot at that one drive. Even in the passing game, he got hot. But even he only averaged 3.1 yards per carry at that point for the whole game. And so the Georgia defense absolutely won the battle up front. They beat up on Alabama's offensive line after getting embarrassed the first time in Atlanta. And Alabama's offensive line came into the game dealing with some injuries. So maybe you could have expected that. But I feel like after the performance we saw from them in Atlanta, seeing them have a more traditional performance for this defense and really come out and just dominate physically up front, outstanding to see. And I think it was just, as a Georgia fan, it was a perfect way for the defensive side of the game to go. Obviously, like I said, the loss of Jameson Williams here is huge. The loss of Mechie also looms large here. But, I mean, that's just football. Injuries are a part of the game. It is what it is. Georgia was down Adam Anderson and a few other guys as well, if you want to go into that. I mean, obviously, Bama was down more guys than Georgia. But you can't take anything away from Georgia because Alabama had injuries. That doesn't in any way cheapen this win. and or the incredible success of the Georgia defense, in my opinion, as they really carried the day here. Never let Bama take control of the game. Never let them get going. I don't think the loss of Jameson Williams or John Mechie really deteriorates or detracts from that at all. And it became obvious, like I said, after losing Jameson Williams, that Alabama's offensive game plan sort of shifted. Their plan on offense became more of a stay on schedule, don't get behind the chains, avoid negative plays. Let's get to 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4 range, and then focus on methodically moving the ball. You get to 3rd and 1 to 4, all of a sudden the defense has to account for the run game and the pass game, and it really prevents Georgia from just teeing off on Alabama in the pass game by blitzing a bunch of people. And they were really effective at that, to be honest, as far as establishing drives. But they ran into a problem that Georgia's offense has seen a lot this year, where they would put together a pretty decent drive, but would have no big explosives on that drive. And so they'd get to about midfield or across midfield often, and then they would stall. And, they had to settle for a field goal. And Georgia blocks a field goal at one point with Jalen Carter. And that's huge. Momentum is huge off a blocked field goal, but then also the fact that they've already kicked 4 field goals at that point. That's their 5th field goal. It gets blocked. It's massive for this man of the game. So even though Bryce Young ended up racking up like 370 passing yards, a lot of it was between the 20s, which obviously there's more yardage there. So of course your yardage is going to come from that. But once they got into the red zone and got close to the end zone, everything sort of condenses, and Georgia really, really took advantage of that defensively and had an outstanding performance in the red zone. Georgia, like I said, their defense played outstanding. They proved to just kind of be too good to just consistently and methodically drive the ball down the field on them and at least score touchdowns. And that makes a huge difference in the game over time. I think that a lot of that has to go to the way Alabama started to call the game post Jameson Williams. But also, I honestly don't think, even if Jameson Williams stays in this game, I don't think it changes the outcome of this game. We'll never know that. But I really don't think that Jameson Williams alone makes up for the point differential in this game. Maybe if they had Mechie and Williams and their top 2 corners, maybe then you're starting to get into where it could probably change the game. But even then, we don't know that. And that's just kind of, hearsay hypotheticals. So all you can go off of is what we saw. And what we saw was Georgia's defense come out and play absolutely outstanding all night. My next big takeaway was that the Georgia offense was based purely off of explosives. That's how they won this game, which is something that I didn't expect because, to be honest, this offense has been lacking in explosives all year. Even when they did hit them this season, they certainly, what the offense was based around, they were like, oh wow, we hit an explosive finally. It wasn't like designing an offense around hitting explosives. We weren't hitting them very frequently. It wasn't something you could rely on. Traditionally, this Georgia offense has been based off of efficiency, slowly, methodically driving the ball down the field, which that is absolutely great in some ways. It wins you time of possession. It helps your defense out a lot. But it's really bad in others because good drives will frequently stall out into nothing or just 3 due to a lack of big chunk yardage plays. You can quickly go to a quick 3 and out. If you get behind the sticks, your offense becomes completely off schedule and has to completely shift like that. But in this game, Georgia's offense was all out of sorts to begin the game. I mean, the offensive line struggled terribly with simple things like just getting the snap off. The entire offense will move and the ball's not snapped. That happened 2 or 3 times. There were other false starts. There was a hands to the face. I mean, it was terrible offensive line play. That doesn't even mention struggling to pick up blitzes. Christian Harris had a huge game. Will Anderson and Dallas Turner both had massive games. And honestly, anybody who doesn't think that Will Anderson is the best player in college football this year is just plain wrong. I felt that way going into this. I felt that way most all of the season, and last night completely proved it once again. Will Anderson is completely the best player, at the very least, the best defensive player in college football this year, without a doubt. Anyway, though, Georgia they weren't able to establish any rhythm or consistency on offense, and that explains why you only got 6 points from them in the first half, and even some of those, they came from that huge 50-something yard catch from George Pickens, which is an absolutely outstanding catch, but it's an explosive play, which is my point in this takeaway. The second half, the offense got a little bit more going, especially on the ground game, but even still, it was mostly the 67-yard run from James Cook that sets up the first touchdown of the game with Zamir White. That's an explosive play that leads to a touchdown right there. The Adonai Mitchell touchdown catch on the free play that Stetson Bennett threw is a 40-yard touchdown pass. It's another hugely explosive play holding up the offense. There's really only one true touchdown drive from the Georgia offense that wasn't based on explosive plays, and that was the one towards the end of the game to put Georgia up by 8. And that drive was almost exclusively Georgia wearing out Alabama in the run game towards the end of the game. And then, Zamir White is going crazy. He's running for 5, 6, 7 yards a carry. And then all of a sudden, Georgia makes a super gutsy play call to swing the ball out to Brock Bowers on the perimeter for a touchdown. Stetson Bennett gets smacked in the face. I thought that flag was a holding call or something. I was so upset for a second. And then, come to find out some legal hands to the face for a roughing the passer. And so that obviously made me happy as a Georgia fan. But super gutsy play call there to put the ball in the air with how well they've been running, and just the danger of throwing a swing pass like that with a blitzer coming at you that could go south in so many different ways. But it worked out for Georgia, and that's really the only drive, like I said, that wasn't almost exclusively explosive play based. Even the other touchdown from Georgia obviously was another explosive play. It was a pick six from Kelee Ringo that sealed the game and put them up 15. Really, the entire, Georgia's scoring offense and defense, but their scoring was entirely held up by explosive plays for the most part. I didn't see that coming. That's not how this team has operated all year. The first half had me incredibly worried because the defense was playing outstanding, but the offense was just so off schedule, and all season hasn't really shown a great ability to be explosive and make up for that, and then they did in this game. And I totally didn't see it coming, and it ended up working out. And got Georgia to almost the exact point total that I predicted they would get to, just in a very different way than I thought they would get there. Bama, on the contrary, has kind of lived and died by the explosive plays somewhat this season, where if they aren't hitting those big deep balls, those 60-yard passes to Williams, or those slants that go for 50 and 60 and big long runs, they've really struggled offensively this season when they can't hit the explosives. But they were able to do it the first time around in the SEC Championship, and they weren't there this game. A lot of that has to go to, like I said, Jameson Williams being out, but the other guys behind him are more than capable of making the explosive plays. I think a lot of it is that Bryce Young was kind of put out of sorts, and he didn't have that familiar target to go to, and the Georgia pass rush was all over him all night, put him in a situation where he wasn't comfortable throwing the ball down the field for those deep balls, those explosives. And Bill O'Brien clearly didn't want to call a game based off of them anymore. He went very conservative with a lot of it. And I know a lot of Alabama fans are not happy with Bill O'Brien after this game. But, explosives are a huge takeaway for this one. Another takeaway for me is that despite this loss, this game showed why Nick Saban is the GOAT. He's the greatest coach of all time. I mean, the dude lost his top 2 corners, his top 2 wide receivers, had a beat-up offensive line, down multiple scholarship running backs, and a starting defensive lineman. And yet Alabama still comes out, controls a large portion of the game, is incredibly competitive with a historically good Georgia team, at least defensively a historically good Georgia team, a Georgia team that has dominated every opponent not named Alabama all season. It hasn't even been close. And then that doesn't even mention how much youth is on this Alabama team. They're incredibly young. I mean, their best 2 players, who are the best offensive player in America and the best defensive player in America, are both coming back next year. They're playing with almost all freshmen in the receiving corps by the time in this game. I mean, incredibly young on both sides of the ball. Obviously, they're going to lose a bunch of guys to the draft. They do every year. But this team, for Alabama standards, was a very young team, and I think you saw that with the inconsistencies they had all year in the regular season until they hit the postseason. They kind of found their stride, and yet they ended up being the runner-ups for the national title. They had an absolutely outstanding year. They won the SEC. I'm just not sure there's another coach out there who could have put together the kind of season that Nick Saban did if they suffered all these same losses. If they lost their top 2 corners, their top 2 receivers, like 4 running backs, what other coach and team is getting to this point? I mean, I don't know if there is one. And I think, and then you look at the way that Saban handled the game in the post game. He was incredibly respectful, and didn't really make excuses. He acknowledged the losses, but didn't make excuses for them, and congratulated Georgia and moved on. He is the greatest coach of all time. Everybody by this point either does know that or should know that. If you don't know that, then I don't know what you've been doing for the last decade and a half. But this game was just another example of why he is the greatest to do it, and I have mad respect for Nick Saban out there. Even as a Georgia fan, as many times as he's crushed my dreams, I can't disrespect him as a coach. He's absolutely the greatest without question. And now my final takeaway from this game, and I think this is the biggest one long term, is that this changes everything for Georgia going forward. All the 1980 jokes that have been running around are dead. All the talk that Kirby Smart can't get it done in the big game, that's all dead. All the talk that Georgia can't beat Alabama, that's dead now. The Kirby is Mark Richt Part 2 stuff, that's also dead. I mean, it puts to bed a lot of that. And a lot of that doesn't, in my opinion, actually have a tangible impact on the performance on the field, as much as people would like to insinuate that it does. But it can affect recruiting when teams recruit against you with things like that. It can affect public perception, which definitely affects recruiting. And it can really, I think it helps the fan base more than anything to know that they finally got over the hump. You know, they finally finished the job. They don't have to deal with all of the online internet people, all the trolls going around talking about 1980. That's all of that's done. That changes everything for Georgia going forward. Stetson Bennett to me now is officially the greatest story in college football history, in my opinion. I'm going to make an entire video on that most likely. I mean, he's the hometown kid who loved Georgia all his life, walks on, leaves to go to JUCO, comes back, somehow finds his way onto the field, is benched for JT Daniels coming into this season. JT gets hurt. Stetson Bennett goes in for a reserve kind of thing and then somehow gets the starting job back once the season gets rolling. Despite all the hate and the doubt, a lot even from his own fan base, and I'll be the first to admit, I was a JT Daniels supporter. I wasn't ever going to hate on Stetson Bennett. I'm always going to support my team, but I thought that JT should have been the guy. And Stetson goes out and he kind of proves you wrong. He goes and he ends a 41-year drought, brings home a national title. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And that's just outstanding to see. And this win, I think, is going to help tremendously, like I said, for the health of the fan base and the mood around the program. A lot more than it will for the actual tangible on-field impact. It's also just great to see them finally get over the hump. For all the guys who have put in so much and not quite made it over the past few years, this team kind of, avenged that for them and made that right. And that's just absolutely great to see. This could also, like I said, carry over into recruiting some. I mean, Georgia's already recruiting at an absolutely elite level. There's no one really doing it better than them consistently other than Alabama, maybe A&M now, but not for the past couple of years they haven't been. But this could, help them raise the bar even more in the future. They finally have that national championship, and that changes a lot about a program. And hopefully they can build upon that going forward and lead to even more national championships within the somewhat near future. Hopefully not another 41 years like Kirby said. But yeah, this win truly does change everything for the program going forward. Getting over that hump and winning a national title changes all of it. I mean, just ask Clemson fans about it a few years ago before they had finally won one, and then they finally got over the hump, and now, look at where they are. I mean, they had a down year this year, but they went on a couple-year run there. So for Georgia, the drought is finally over. The Georgia sports curse is officially lifted. The Braves won. Georgia won. I mean, the Falcons are a lost cause at this point, but the Georgia sports curse as a whole has been completely lifted and finally has been overcome in a lot of ways. Anyway, that basically wraps up my main thoughts on this game. Like I said, it went somehow or somewhat how I expected it, but mostly different than how I expected, at least in the first half. The explosive plays from Georgia kind of took me off guard. I was shocked at how good both defenses played. I figured they would both be very effective, but in this day and age, offense just tends to win out, and in this game, they really didn't, at least not until late in the second half for Georgia. I couldn't be any happier with this team as a Georgia fan. What all they've accomplished this year still doesn't quite seem real to me, to be honest, but man, does it really feel good to finally get over that Bama hump and win the Natty. All that being said, though, if you have made it this far in the video, be sure to leave a like and let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are on the game, and what you think this means for both Georgia and Alabama going forward. Also, subscribe to the channel for more college football content like this in the future, as I will be continuing to put out college football content pretty regularly, at least as regularly as my engineering homework will allow. We've started back the new semester, so I'm going to try to keep content coming out. I will do my best with that. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.